New reaction today from Secretary of State Antony Blinken to that military coup in Niger. This after the soldiers who staged the uprising have now elected their military leader as new head of state. The White House condemned their actions. Here's Blinken at a news conference in Australia.
Let me be very, very clear about this, as I have been in my phone conversations. Our economic and security partnership with Niger, which is significant, hundreds of millions of dollars, depends on the continuation of the democratic governance and constitutional order that has been disrupted. So that assistance, that support is in clear jeopardy as a result of these actions, which is another reason why they need to be immediately reversed.
NBC's Courtney Kube is in the capital city of Niamey. Courtney, welcome. It has been 4 days, right, since that revolt. So how are things over there? What are you seeing?
Yeah, that's right. And it's been about a day now since we've had one person from this military council who's emerged as the leader, the self-proclaimed president of this country. So what I will say is the first 2 days or so that after President Bazoum, he's the democratically elected president here in Niger, the first 2 days or so after he began to be a hostage to his own security forces, we saw some protests in the streets. Some of them got a little bit heated, though, Alex, including burning some vehicles, throwing stones. But in the 2 days since then, we haven't seen protests. The streets are relatively calm. People are operating as normal. Now, from the U.S. perspective, they still recognize President Bazoum as the leader here of this country. We heard Secretary of State Antony Blinken. He actually has spoken to him twice since he's became a detainee in his own presidential residence. We also heard some pretty strong language out of the White House late this week. John Kirby, the spokesperson for the National Security Council, is laying out some of the real consequences that could befall Niger if this coup were to stick. Here's what he had to say.
The United States condemns in the strongest terms any effort to seize power by force and to disrupt constitutional order in Niger. A military takeover may cause the United States to seize security and other cooperation with the government of Niger, jeopardizing existing security and non-security partnerships. To the people of Niger, it's important that you know the United States and this administration stands with you. We are committed to defending democratic governance and the respect for the rule of law and human rights.
And we heard Secretary of State Antony Blinken say that hundreds of millions of dollars are at stake. Well, according to a State Department official, it's more than $400 million are at stake. But in addition to that, it's also the security assistance here. Now, that's actually what we came here to cover, was the U.S. military's mission here. It's about 1,100 individuals strong. They train the Nigerian military forces, and they support them in some of their counter-terror missions. This area is where several different serious and growing terror networks have been converging. An al-Qaeda affiliate and an affiliate of the Islamic State, known as the Islamic State in the greater Sahel. They are here and they are moving closer. They are gaining ground. There's real concern that if, in fact, this military coup does become the government here in Niger, the U.S. would have to pull, by law, would have to pull some of that assistance, Alex.
Courtney, very quickly, you mentioned the first 2 days of unrest and the demonstrations, the fires and the like, and then 2 days of relative calm, which begs this question: where do the people of Niger stand on this?
Yeah, and that's an excellent question. And it just makes it even more complicated when you consider that some of the people on day two who were protesting outside of the president's party headquarters, in fact, setting fire to things, they were holding Russian flags. There is some belief that some of them may have actually been paid to do so. But it's really unclear where the people stand. The first day they seemed to be supporting the president. The second day they were against him. And that's even made more difficult because some of the people who are standing up behind General Chiani, the self-proclaimed new leader of the country, it's not clear, according to U.S. officials, whether they all really are on board with this coup or not, Alex.
Okay. Well, when it becomes clear, I know you will report it for us. Courtney Kube, thank you.